The intersection of endurance sport, health, fitness, and life. Challenging conventional ideas and empowering people with the science of self-propelled motion. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast, hosted by Tony Rich.
Good, better, how. Now, good, better, how is something I strongly encourage you to use after every session, after every practice, after every race, after every interval or skill trial, on good days, on meh days, whether you're finishing or executing well, or if what you got was something that you weren't anticipating. You can use good, better, how two ways. You can use it to reflect on your overall session, taking in the big picture of the thing that you did, and you can use it to reflect on critical moments, right? Which might be a single interval or skill, a single key segment of a race. Yeah, think of this as a review of a few key snapshots from whatever it is you just did. Let's start with the good. Right? There is always more good than bad or better on any and every day. We don't always see it because we're so conditioned to look for what we did wrong or what we can improve. Yeah, that's crap. Right? Highlight some of the good. One key component of motivation is competence. And recognizing the good helps you realize you're actually pretty darn competent. And as you work and practice, you're getting even more so. So where can you look for the good? Well, you can consider your skills, the strategies and tactics you just executed, your efforts, your actual actions of what you just did, and your decisions and your choices. For the good, identify and name one or two things you nailed. For the better, look in those same places and ask yourself, what are one or two things that could have gone better? For your consideration of things that could be better, you have to remember that your choices have to be within your control. They have to be reflected on in the context of you and what's important to you right now. So, your current health, your current stress, your current fitness, your current skill proficiencies, your experience, right? All of those things set the context of what is possible for you right now. That's where your betters need to be aligned with. This isn't, well, compared to that awesome, fabulous other athlete, or it's also not, yeah, but when I was more fill in the blank, whatever. Better is strictly about where and how you are at that moment. Right? What you identify as your better could be a skill or an effort that's within your range right now, but that you under-executed. Or it could also be something that you recognize that you can't do right now and you need to learn or add in order to progress. Now, will there be more than one or two things that could have gone better? Yeah, of course there will. But this isn't a daily beating, it's a daily reflection. The how is where you offer yourself your own best solution. You may know the solution and just need to visualize it a few times and execute it in your practice a few times in order to sharpen it up. Other times, you may know the solution, but you recognize that you haven't been doing it. The how then becomes how to add this to your discovery, to your visualization script, to your key features, and then start working on it. Sometimes you might think you know the solution, but have a little bit of doubt that it's the right one. Well, this is where your how becomes talk to your coach or talk to someone with more experience than you. You collaborate so that you can hone in on that right choice for the next action for your future. Finally, you may actually realize you don't have a way to answer the how for the something that could have been better. How then becomes to go seek information or ask for help. You need to know who your trusted resources are outside yourself, and then set up a plan to find them or ask for help from them. Now, please remember, you don't have to do everything all at once. This is your fun. Right? It's serious fun, but it's still your fun. It's fun to become more competent and feel like you're more in control of the hows. And that lets you focus on what to grow and build yourself. It's a good thing.
That is Dr. Susan Sotir. She's a PhD in sport physiology and exercise psychology, and assistant professor at Springfield College. She coaches with breakthrough performance coaching in the Northeast in the United States. She's one of the most knowledgeable and experienced coaches in the world, with over 25 years of experience in endurance sport coaching. And she works with beginners and competitive adults and even professional athletes. She's a level 3 USA triathlon coach. There's only a very small number of those. And she's also a former Division III swimmer, and herself competed in short course and long course triathlon. I think you'll find the conversation to be a gold mine for the endurance enthusiast. You'll find some great advice here. And, we talk about her approach with building mental skills with athletes, things like overcoming failure, confidence, lack of confidence, burnout. We talk about the heightened awareness around providing tailored training and racing protocols for female athletes. For example, the 28-day cycle, menstruation and race week protocols during menstruation, female athlete triad, relative energy deficiency in sport, menopause and perimenopause, and whether or not she's doing anything differently with her female athletes. And I think all the female athletes listening will get something out of that. Like all swimming subject matter experts that come on to the podcast, I ask about swimming and increasing the swimming proficiency with triathletes, pool swimmers, and open water swimmers, and some of the things that she does with athletes. And then finally, we talk about nutrition, strength, and body composition, and some of the things she does, if anything, with respect to coaching athletes through the training cycle and off-season training cycle. You'll find direct links to all of Susan's contacts in the show notes. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. One of the coaches that I have an immense amount of respect and admiration for. So, without further delay, I give you Dr. Susan Sotir. All right, I am on with Susan Sotir. Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is going to be fun.
Yes. I've been wanting to talk to you for some time. I know, we've come across paths in the past, and, you're one of the coaches that have a broad research agenda in sports physiology, sports psychology, nutrition, strength and conditioning, everything. So I'll let you, in your own words, describe to the listener base. Maybe if you can describe your qualifications, academic, specializations, your sport experience, and including why you decided to go the route of sports physiology.
It's a really easy way of saying I've been around sport for a long time. To be able to have such a broad range of things behind me. But I started swimming as a little kid because my mother was terrified of the water, and she was afraid that I would be around water and she wouldn't be able to save me. So I ended up actually starting as a synchronized swimmer, and moved from there to being a completely obnoxious, annoying preteen who did nothing. And then started racing swimming. Swam in high school, swam in college. And in college, got the chance to start coaching. We had to do some kind of fundraising. So we could either teach Saturday morning swimming lessons to children of the faculty, or there was one slot to coach masters adults a couple nights a week. And I'm like, yeah, sign me up there. And I was not a physiologist in college. I was an English major and a classics major. So if you needed something translated to Latin, I was your girl. But the folks who were in this master's group ranged from adults
who were just learning how to swim because they didn't know how and wanted to be able to teach their children and to save their own lives, up through professional triathletes whose job depended on my providing an environment for them to succeed. And that weight landed on me pretty heavily. And I really started to think about how do I need to teach this? What do I need to teach? What was important to be included? How do I offer information to these different levels of people? And I was the child of a teacher, and I had been a lifeguard and swim instructor, and so had done some teaching in that realm. But at that point in time, I really recognized that I was responsible for these people, and I darn well better learn some stuff. Right. So I started there, and I started with the physiology side of things, because training is about training, right? That's what we understood it to be. And right. Wow, did I fall in love. Even as I left college and started teaching and then went back for first master's, I still kept coaching. And throughout the coaching process, I kept learning. And from learning, just starting at physiology, starting to learn some of the biomechanics of swimming, learning how to create and craft a season and build people up for events, all those pieces came together. And at that point, I started recognizing what my gaps were. And one of my first gaps was strength and conditioning. I had athletes who couldn't get in the water more than an hour a day at one point in time. So, okay, well, we got to supplement that. And so that led me to study and get my certified strength and conditioning specialist certificate. I actually have a 3-digit membership number. I have been there that long. But that was kind of the first real big gap. And then the next real big gap that came up was I was coaching a high school boys team. And I knew that I had really a very good grasp of the training side of things and a very good grasp of preparing people for events. Mm-hmm. And I would put 2 guys up on the blocks who I knew were prepared for their events, and one would crush it and one wouldn't. And I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. And I was having dinner with my husband one night, and I was talking that through. He's like, you should learn more about sports psychology. I was like, yeah, I should. Obviously I should. And he followed that up with, you should go back to school. I was like, excuse me? At that point we had, our child was 8 or 9 years old. I was getting ready to turn 40. This was not part of the plan. Yeah. But once he said it, and once I thought about it, I was interested in it. So I started looking at it, and I ended up going, obviously, because I have a doctorate in sports psychology, but I recognized very quickly that I was not part of the mental health counselor route of sport. Mm-hmm. I was really focused on the science side, and then the skill learning, the skill practice, the skilled performances. That's the piece where I was fascinated.
Right. So not clinical psychology and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Nope. There are people who are amazing at that, and I know what I'm good at, and it ain't that. So I very quickly learned that as well. I just don't have the barriers that I can put up to separate myself from an athlete's pain, and need to be able to do that. But that whole process really kicked me into a different appreciation for how all the pieces connect, and how to really read the research, and how to break down information in a much more systematic way than I had been before. And I ended up teaching for a while and realizing that I love teaching, but I love coaching more. And so that was the point where it's like, all right, I'm leaving the job a million girls would kill for, that tenure track faculty position, and I'm going to coach full time. And so once I was then out in that world, I also recognized that the fueling piece, particularly for, I coach mostly triathletes, primarily 70.3 and long course full Ironman. I needed to know more about that. So that's kind of where that piece came in. The opportunity to start to learn more about that. So for me, it's recognizing all of the different components that we need to work on with our athletes, and just having been doing it for such a long time, being able to get better at different aspects of it. And all I ever realize is how much I still don't know. So that there's lots more to go still.
Right. Well, it definitely, incredible range. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. So I want to ask you some questions about those mental skills you talk about with athletes and how you work with athletes. And there's a sort of heightened awareness around training and coaching female athletes. I want to touch on that. And then I want to tap into your swimming knowledge, because that's, typically one of the points of challenge for triathletes. And then maybe even talk about some nutrition, strength, and body composition. So how about first we talk about, let's jump into the mental skills that you're able to help with athletes. How do you go through that process? Do you start with a questionnaire or just talking? How do you help athletes with the mental skill part of it?
Biggest part of it is talking to people. I do consult a bit, but for the most part, I work with a small group of athletes and I coach them for their event. So the day-to-day stuff that goes into their training plan, the conversations in and around that, and all that sort of work running up to an event. Mm-hmm. But the conversations are the biggest pieces. And from those conversations, I start to get an idea of, some of the things that have happened in their past. And that's going to impact some of the choices I'm going to make for the future. When we're talking about, the mental skills that predict or lead to better performances, first and foremost one is called self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to perform a specific task or skill. And so many of our athletes either have had performances in their past that have not promoted that feeling of efficacy, or they haven't had those experiences in their past at all. So where do they draw on that from? So what I typically ask for folks to do is not to start going through some, big notebook or this big, whole series of strategies. The first thing I ask them to do is to just comment on their daily workouts. I want to know good, better, how. Mm-hmm. So what went well, what could have gone better, that's in their control. So we're already there starting to shape this distinction between things that you can control versus things that you can't.
Right.
And then what would you have done? How will you do it differently next time? And in that piece, we're touching on a few things. The good piece is to help folks recognize that there's always more good than bad in any session. Most people will take a session and be like, oh, it sucked. Or, oh, that was awesome. But it's like, no, it was a little bit of both. Every time it was a little bit of both. But we forget about the good if there's anything that was negative, bad, imperfect, blah, blah, blah. And that good is the thing that fosters motivation. Competence promotes motivation. So if you're feeling like you're getting better at something, you want to do it more. So making sure that folks are checking that box of, what was I competent at today? I think is a really important piece to layering efficacy day by day, as opposed to trying to wait until a few weeks before the event and be like, you did so good, you're ready. I find that to be one thing that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And the better component also promotes that competency, because some days there actually is nothing you could have done to change what went wrong. It just went wrong. But you could change it, it also builds your inventory or your catalog of decision-making choices.
Mm-hmm.
So the more options that you have and the more options that you've actually practiced retrieving and using, well, now your decision-making during a training day or during a race is quicker, easier,
right,
more automatic. And that's always a good thing too. You were going to say, I interrupted.
No, I was going to say, just to build on what you were talking about, you see the gamut. You see confidence, but then you see either overconfidence or lack of confidence, social influence. That's a big one that I've seen. Everyone's looking at everyone else's Strava and then social media, and everyone's trying to compete. Burnout is another one. I mean, I had an athlete that was multiple years doing Ironman, half Ironman, and then at one point it was just difficult to try to motivate her. And what do you do in that situation? How do you help someone through something like burnout?
Try to keep them from getting there in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard, because if we think about stress, and my coaching partners and I will talk about this all the time, we have a total stress budget available to us, just like we have a total financial budget available to us. And if we spend that budget in our daily life stress, we don't have as much left over for our training life stress.
Right.
And vice versa. If we spend all of our stress budget in that training stress arena, our life stress perhaps doesn't get the attention that it needs. And I feel like one of the things that really contributes to burnout is we don't tell people that it's okay to skip a day, or that it's fine to like not do an event if you really aren't just up for it. If you've got 18 different things going on in your life, maybe we choose the shorter event that day, or maybe we choose a different event, or we change the goal to, hey, just go out and have some fun with your friends, get a beer afterwards, just kick back. We're so often focused on the goal that was set at one point in the year that we don't, myself included, we're not always great at revisiting that goal as things are changing in people's lives. And, sometimes you don't even hear it from them, but all you see is like a string of red blocks, when the training calendar doesn't all its little things perfectly. You see a string of red and no comment. And it's kind of like, that's when it's like, hey, how are things going? Fine.
Yeah.
No. We need a little chit chat, don't we?
Yeah.
And just trying to stay involved in where somebody's at with their total picture, I think is the best place to help for burnout. It's brutal to study as a professional, because that's a completely different story. But for recreational adults, even serious recreational adults, that those stress management watchwords and looks are the best strategy for getting ahead of that, and then making sure folks have some coping skills as well for when things get a little too much.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and some of it connects in the social influence. You see athletes, they will, I got to sign up for 10 events this year, and I got to try to crush all of them because I have to, compete and still show everybody that I'm fast. And it's that type of social influence, and that continued over several years, eventually just leaves someone with burnout. Like, I don't know if I have it this year to even do even half of what I used to do. Right.
Like, who can in this day and age with so many demands on all of our time, who can? Yeah. But that was always the expectation. And then people start to expect it of you. And then it becomes part of your athlete identity.
Yeah.
And we sometimes forget we can change our athlete identity.
Yeah.
We don't have to be that same athlete day in, day out, year in, year out. We can react to where we're at in our circumstances and pick one thing to progress on, or change our focus a little bit, or or just do all those events and just put it out there ahead of time to shift those external expectations to, hey, you know what? I want to show up at everything because I love seeing y'all. We're going to see what happens.
Yeah.
And take that watch off and take that pressure off a little.
Right. Yeah. Do some events just for knowing that you're not going to go out and crush it. Just do it for fitness and enjoyment, whether you're recreational or competitive. Sometimes that just taking the mental stress off of having to perform can help. All right. So, I mean, I've been there. I've seen that for sure. And, both as an athlete, and then also I've seen athletes go through the whole life cycle to the point where they, at the end, just feel like they can't do it anymore. So let's talk now about how you coach female athletes, you and your colleagues. So there's been, over the last few years, heightened awareness around this. There was a book written a few years ago by a sports physiologist, Stacy Sims. She wrote a book, Roar, and it basically created sort of heightened awareness around female athletes. So I think her tagline is "Women are not small men. Women are different, so they should be trained different, coached different." And behind that is this sort of the idea that most of the sports physiology research has been done on men, and because of that, it's not representative, or completely representative for females. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. First, do you think that is what do you think about that position about the sports physiology research? Do you think it's valid, and are you doing anything specifically different with female athletes, whether it be around menstruation or female athlete triad awareness, menopause, perimenopause, things like that?
So she brought attention to something that has been a conversation in the sport and exercise physiology world for a long time. The biggest pool of available research subjects in colleges are college-age students. And because of that menstrual cycle and the fluctuations of it, researchers didn't want to have to figure out how to work with that. So college-age men primarily have made up the subjects for sport physiology research since they started doing sport physiology research. Stacy Sims did a phenomenal job, not only writing that book, but promoting that book and getting that information out there and getting more people to pick it up. Mm-hmm. Where the nuance gets lost is that the research studies that are cited in Roar, all of her information is accurate. Where it fails to communicate nuance is that all of that information is based on averages.
Right.
So anytime we're talking about research findings that are summarized findings, we're talking about averages. So the idea of the 28-day cycle, well, that's an average. Some women are going to have a much shorter cycle. Some people are going to have a longer cycle. So that cycle is much more variable. Right. And the differences and distinctions between the sort of physiological characteristics of the follicular stage versus the luteal stage, again, are going to be nuanced based on the individual.
Right.
So kind of how we actually spent an entire day on just talking about this topic with our coaching staff. We do a coaches education day fairly regularly, but we do it a 10-hour day at least once a year where we really dive deep on something. And we dove deep on this. And how we framed it was, all right, what factors affect endurance performance? And if we're talking about that, well, it's your preparation, your training, your skill, your specificity, your adaptations,
Right.
your ability to maintain temperature, so cooling, sweating, circulation, your fueling, including fuel availability, ventilation, contractile proteins, all that sort of stuff, execution of your work. So that's comfort, psychological effects, confidence, those pieces, and then your equipment. And when you look at it through the lens of where can the menstrual cycle have an impact, well, really, it's pretty much everything but equipment. And then that means we have to actually work with our athletes individually to understand what their effects actually are. Mm-hmm. There are some people who are extremely impacted by a higher temperature onset of sweating in the follicular stage, in those days before menses start. Well, for them, we need very specific cooling strategies. We need pre-cooling. We need during race cooling. We need temperature maintaining strategies for those folks. Other folks, it doesn't bother them. So it's like, all right, well, we're not going to spend all your energy doing this. Let's spend your energy on things that do bother you. And then when you're looking at fueling, same thing. What can somebody tolerate? And I think one of the pieces that Stacey Sims really highlighted in that book was, as you get older, you have more difficulties taking in your fuel as food. As fluid. And it's easier for you to take it in as food. And you are also going to have more challenges with fructose or fruit sugars. Well, okay, great. So if we know this with somebody who is an athlete who's approaching menopause or in perimenopause or in menopause, well, then we have to make sure we give them a number of trial runs at their fueling plan and do it under stressful conditions and make sure they're fatigued going into it, make sure it's warm, really offering a number of race rehearsals so that those pieces can be ironed out. And when we're thinking about this topic, the other piece we have to really talk about is the idea of birth control and hormonal versus non-hormonal birth controls, because those are not typical cycles. So you're not going to have the same hormonal responses, but you're going to have side effects potentially from the type of birth control you're on. So it has to be part of the conversation. Right. And what's really interesting with the group I coach with is there's nobody who coaches just one sex. We all have athletes of both sexes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we all have to be able to have conversations that maybe aren't our first instinctive, comfortable conversations.
That's true.
But if we're gonna prepare a person for something that they are really striving for, then our comfort really has to not matter very much. What matters is, are they prepared? Can they cool themselves? Can they fuel themselves? Can they execute? And can they do it as well as possible on the day that they're given? Yeah. And that means everybody gets attention.
I think you should write a book. You should write a book on this topic. I would buy it. But I think you're right, 100%, because, I believe the premise about the studies done mostly on men, because if you know researchers, you may not have the resources to do multiple groups, your sample. You may not have the resources to do multiple samples, and then, if your sample is, say, 50, and then now you have to split those to 25 and 25, that may lower the quality of the study. And so I can see the reason why the studies are just men, because researchers they may not have the resources. So I see that. And you're right. It's incredibly thought-provoking, because prior to the whole heightened awareness and her book. I didn't never touched on it as a coach with a female athlete. I just never talked about it, just sort of avoided it. And then so it did take me into a different direction. I started saying, you know what, I should be, talking about this. I have a strategy for talking about this, however uncomfortable it may seem, because in the beginning I would bring it up and they would, they sort of look at me sideways, like, do you really want to talk about this? But
like,
yeah.
We're having this conversation, really? Okay.
But then it gave me credibility because, we should be talking about this. And then oral contraception, IUD, you're right that it's incredibly complex. I think what she showed in the book is she's talking about the normal distribution of female athlete. But I think what you're saying is you have to have individualized conversations. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's whenever we look at the big picture, we're going to look at the average picture, or we're going to look at the sort of reductionist. Here's the bell curve. Mm-hmm. But we're coaches, and as coaches, we don't work with the bell curve. As coaches, we work with individuals. In the endurance sport world, team environments are slightly different, but at the same time, like there's a person in front of us, and we have the opportunity to talk to that person, so we can individualize that person's experience, from everything from their training to their daily routine to their fueling. And the fueling piece really applies to men as well, because you mentioned female athlete triad, right? But the step that happens before that is relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S.
Correct. Yes.
And that has been, there's some really nice position papers that applies that to both men and women. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have energy available to adapt, we don't adapt. And if we don't adapt, we don't change, or we break. And those things are problems. And we have to be able really to have those conversations with any athlete in front of us about, well, why are you telling me to eat carbohydrates when I'm on a 5-hour ride? I'm sick of stuffing my face with gels. And it's like, well, you don't have to eat gels, but you have to eat. And then being able to have that conversation about why you need to eat as much as you need to eat, and what it's doing for you, and then why you're eating afterwards, and how that energy is necessary, not just to help you move, but to help keep you focused and attentive and safe. Because if you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, all those things, you're not going to be the best athlete you can. And, the more risks you take, the more risks are possible.
Yeah, I had, you're right about, I had Dr. Margot Mountjoy. She did all of the RED-S research with the IOC. And you're absolutely right. These issues don't just affect women, they affect men too. Low energy availability can have a substantial impact. Now, do you with menstruation, would you recommend that an athlete do race scheduling around menstruation, or no?
If there's somebody who is terribly affected by symptoms, it's a conversation that I'd have.
Right.
Absolutely. Because if somebody's going to spend a year preparing for something, you want them to have the best chance of their best day.
Right.
If somebody is mildly affected by symptoms, no, I just make sure that those race rehearsals started several months out, so that we could have those race rehearsals on the same-ish days that they would be racing, so that we get the same kinds of days ahead of it, and then the same kind of day racing-ish. It's never exactly the same. But giving them multiple opportunities to have those race rehearsals, and figuring out exactly what their symptoms are, mm-hmm. and what can help them along. Oftentimes adding a few more calories, adding a bit more salt, adding a bit of acetaminophen, those pieces can be enough to shift the discomfort to something that is completely manageable, especially for high tolerance endurance athletes.
Yeah. And I suppose that would come out in training, right? So if the Ironman is that week or your marathon is that week, you would do those race rehearsals and figure out incorporating certain things into your race nutrition strategy, your hydration strategy, and so on.
Yep. But again, that's for people with the more, mild, manageable, not really impact or not massively impactful symptoms. There are folks whose symptoms are extremely impactful. And those folks, first and foremost, the first person I'm going to send them to is their OBGYN. Like, you got to go talk to your doc, because you don't have to live this way. There's a lot of different options and opportunities for medical interventions that can make your life better. And that's step one. If you're miserable, you let's see if we can't figure out how to make you not miserable. And then once we get to where you are comfortable with what your life is like, then all right, let's work with managing what we're working with. If you are somebody who is losing a lot of fluids because your digestive system is disrupted, well, okay, let's take that into account and make sure that we're getting more fluids into you while you're racing, so that we're maintaining an appropriate fluid and electrolyte balance for you.
Okay. And then, of course, the contraception throws another question into that, right? IUD, oral contraception, how does that affect?
Many of those are non-hormonal, they don't affect people in the same ways that the normal hormonal fluctuations do. That's not true for everybody, but again, this is where it's like you gotta have the conversation, so that and if someone doesn't want to share it with you, well, that's their right. They don't have to by any stretch of the imagination. You can say, look, the only reason I'm asking isn't because I'm a nosy Parker. The reason I'm asking is because I want to know if there's anything I can do to help shift things to the positive for you. But if you're comfortable with managing it yourself and where you're at, just, let me know if you need my help in the future with that piece of things.
Right.
And I'll stay in my lane over here, and we'll keep preparing you for your event best as possible.
I like that. And then if there's any more complicated questions, I'm coming to you. Maybe we can transition over into swimming. And it could be, because I know that swimming is another one of your expertise. And I'm surprised about the synchro, though. You started off in synchro. Interesting.
So I grew up in Santa Clara, California, which now is Silicon Valley, but is also the site of a international swim center where Mark Spitz trained. But it's also where a group called the Santa Clara Aquamaids were. And one of my best friends, her mom was taking her to the tryouts, and my mom said, "Oh, we'll go swimming." And so this is how I ended up a synchronized swimmer.
Interesting. Yeah. You guys know, because I knew some synchronized swimmers, and you guys know some unbelievable movements in the water. I remember that, Masters, I saw someone and I was like, how are you doing that? So, it's
like, if I look back on it from a coaching perspective now, with the knowledge that I have, with the information I have about how developmental athletes build efficacy and competence and confidence, I pretty much kept swimming in spite of many things. Let's just go with that. We'll leave that one right. It was the 70s, and it was a time and place where, suck it up, buttercup was the theme.
Yeah, so I hear you. Yep. So, triathletes are usually in the same boat with this, where the swimming is the weakest discipline.
Yeah.
And some of it comes from this. I didn't grow up swimming, so I'm never going to be a good swimmer. You can't win in the swim. I'm sure you heard that before. So people sort of neglect swimming altogether. So what advice would you give to triathletes of varying abilities to become better swimmers and better open water swimmers?
Actually swim.
Right.
I am sounding a little bit fresh, but it is when we don't feel like we're good at something, we're not motivated to do it. Right. And even when we do go and do it, we want to succeed so badly that we often try and force our progress along, as opposed to sort of welcome the progress and seek the discomfort in order to then find the comfort. Swimming is not running or cycling. It is not what I would call a gross motor activity. It's not all big muscles. You are moving big muscles, but you're also moving fine motor muscles. Some of the refinements are minuscule. Mm-hmm. And you are linking together a series of discrete individual movements that are rarely part of any of your past experiences. And you need to do them in a rhythm and a timing that is not synchronous between the two sides. It's asynchronous between the two sides. And you're doing this in a substance that provides you with almost zero tactile feedback to tell you if you're doing it right or wrong. It is one of the hardest things to learn as an adult because it is hard. It's the equivalent of learning how to play piano as an adult and expecting to be a concert level pianist in 2 years.
Right.
And it's hard. And the best advice that I can give, the places where I've found the most successes with athletes, is giving them opportunities to experience what it feels like to, first of all, be able to do the movement on land. Because the first question I ask folks is can you do this? And, whether it's I show them something or I describe the action, can you do this? And if they can't do it on land, how can I expect them to do it in water? So I have found that teaching a lot of that timing in different individual smaller activities on land, well, at least now you know how to do the movement. Okay, great. Now let's put it in the water. And then let's understand the water, right? So first of all, can the individual perform the task? Next, can they perform the task in the environment that we're asking them for? And water is a crazy complex environment because as we try to move faster through water, the water provides more resistance against us. That's just the physics of it. Unless, like on the bike, we shape ourselves in a way that reduces that drag coefficient as that substance goes around us.
Right.
And so often we want to move our arms faster or kick our legs harder. But if we don't position our bodies in a way that interacts with the environment in a positive and beneficial fashion, it doesn't matter how fast we move our arms or kick our feet. We're not going to go anywhere because the water is going to resist us even harder because we're trying to go faster.
Yeah.
And to me, like that's the puzzle. That's like the really neat part of all this. But once you can sort of accept that you're not going to go from a 2-minute swimmer to a minute 30 swimmer per 100 in a week, and you just accept, okay, if I'm a 2-minute swimmer who uses less energy, that's a win. Okay, start with that.
Yeah.
And then Then, okay, now how can I become a 155 swimmer? Because a 155 swimmer over 4,200 yards is a much faster swimmer than a 2 minute swimmer.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And a lot of it is swim more, right? So, yeah, because of this idea that, hey, look, it's only 2% of the whole event. Let's just blow it off and swim once a week. I see a lot of that. But also, I think a lot of triathletes don't know what to do even when they go to the pool, right? So you walk into any pool, you could always tell the triathletes, right? So they sort of swim a little bit, stop at the wall for 3 minutes, swim a little bit, stop at the wall for 2 minutes. And you can always tell the triathletes, right? Or they're trying to record a swim distance with their watch. All right. I know some coaches who will bar any watches from the swim session because the triathletes are too busy with their garments trying to record a distance. They're too busy trying to press buttons and record distances than actually swimming. So I think I find also that a lot of triathletes just don't know what to do even when they go into the pool. But I get it because some people know my history. I started swimming at 30 for triathlon, and then I became a master swimmer, a master swim coach, a Red Cross lifeguard, all of that. So, but I think the mindset is, maybe this is another mindset thing, that there needs to be some form of mindset shift behind, I didn't start doing this at 9, so I have a death sentence in swimming forever.
It's really interesting to me that as endurance sport coaches, we still often try and coach swimmers like we're swim coaches. And I really think that it's a mindset that we've had because those of us who were swim coaches, that's how we know how to coach. And everybody else has learned from swim coaches. So this is how we know how to do things. But if we start rolling it back a little bit and thinking about, well, what is my 1 hour sustainable pace? Like we would call it functional threshold power, maximal lactate steady state, critical speed, critical power. That's a whole other podcast. But what can I sustainably do for 1 hour? Okay, great. How do I refine that? Do I need to improve my capacity for work? Because does it just fade, or is it so low that it's not fast enough to meet what I need to succeed in the event? Or do I need to build my tolerance for something faster, but something that's sustainable for a longer time? 50s, 100s are not going to make a faster triathlete. They're going to make you feel fast because you swam a 121, 100. Well, Good for you. You almost died after. So what good was that? Can you give me 10 14500s with 5 seconds rest? What can we do to improve your sustained speed as well as your perception of effort as you're doing that? I always look at, I love watching races. I love watching professional races, right? Because in professional races, you watch the people swimming and you see that pack spreading out, and you can see the people who are swimming over what their probably true sub-threshold effort should be, because they want and need to be part of that race. But you see that difference showing up in the transition area when some people ease right on through and other people are like chugging and slugging. And then you see that impact of that in longer races in later half of the run, because they went so far above what their true capacity was in order to be in the race, that the resources that they burned weren't replaced, weren't
Right.
sustainable. And if we look at amateur athletes, recreational athletes, we see people, I had a great swim and a great bike and I fell apart on the run.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
did you have your swim or did you have somebody else's swim? Were you prepared for the swim that you actually went out and had? I would rather see somebody swim a 2.4 miles at a 155 pace, come out of that water fresh as daisy, springing along through transition, and start their nutrition plan right away, as opposed to needing to spend 30 minutes getting their heart rate down, getting their stomach settled, getting everything regrouped and revamped because they swam a 148 pace.
Right.
It's a really interesting trade-off, but I in my mind, it's a couple things. I think it's, number one, recognize that you have to integrate technical work in with your swims, in with the intention of actually translating that practice into forward movement.
Right.
Not just, is my hand pretty, is my elbow high? Great if they're pretty, but you're not going forward. I don't care. Are you moving forward? And then how are you moving forward? Can you make that more effective? And then how much energy are you using to move forward? Can you train that to be something you can sustain for longer?
Right.
Or can you train that something that you can sustain at a higher pace and get used to that? I really think those are the bigger questions of the swim that we forget about when we talk about fingertips and elbows.
Right. Yeah.
But if you ain't moving forward, you ain't moving forward.
Right. Now, just from a cross training perspective, do you mix in or recommend mixing in non-free with free in your swimmers, or do you just punt on the non-free?
When I was coaching masters, yeah, absolutely. Everybody should do all the strokes. You're at a masters group, you should do all the strokes, 100%. If you're training yourself by yourself and going out and just trying to get in an effective workout, I'll put in choice, 100 choice, 200 choice here and there.
Yeah.
If someone chooses to do something, fabulous. If they choose not to, if they choose to do a drill set or a kick set or go for that pull buoy, that's their choice. They're working with a small amount of time available to them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at what you're working for. But if you're coming to masters 3 times a week and I'm your coach on deck, yeah, we're all doing butterfly and backstroke and breaststroke and freestyle.
Yeah, or I do what's called triathletes. I am replace fly with free.
But so I would argue that butterfly is one of the best ways to teach a catch and pull, because if you can master the underwater component of butterfly, your freestyle benefits to a massive degree, because butterfly is one of the few strokes that is in the same plane as freestyle, has the same early vertical, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. You need to slow down at the front to get water, and you need to push that water underneath you in order to move forward. That's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same mechanics as freestyle without the body rotation. It's symmetrical. So it can actually be easier for some folks to master it and capture it.
I'm with you 100%. I get the eye rolls when I tell people that they should be doing all the strokes. But strength. Everyone always wants functional strength. I mean, you do even a 50 in a butterfly. That's like doing chest flies in the weight room. I mean, it's incredible. I'll get any of those guys in the weight room, those guys that usually just walk around and bench press. I'll get them in the pool and try to see if any one of them can do a 50 fly.
It's funny, when I was coaching the high school boys, I mean, we needed bodies. We needed human beings to come and fill out our team. And one of the years they recruited a guy who was a football player, and Buddy couldn't swim much at all. He was turned into one of my best 50 swimmers because he didn't think, he just swam.
Yeah.
And we almost got him like into a good butterfly event. We just couldn't get the feet. But if I'd had another year with him, I think he could have been as good a 50 flyer as he was a 50 freer.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I could, that could be a whole podcast in itself on the swimming. I mean, you've been generous with your time. So let's finish up with talking about nutrition, strength, and body composition. So this one is often something you have to work through with athletes, especially nowadays. We're getting towards the end of the year. All you're seeing now is the fad diet of the century out on social media. Everyone's asking about, should I do this? Should I do that? How do you train your athletes through nutrition, strength, body composition, whether it be in the training cycle or the off season?
I don't talk about it that much, quite frankly.
Yeah.
If someone talks to me about it, then it's a conversation. If we can do this sport in so many different body types that I'm always going to be far more interested in 10 more watts than 10 less pounds. Always. Yeah. 1,000% of the time. If somebody is not fueling themselves sufficiently, that's a conversation that usually gets picked up because their performance starts to deteriorate. So that becomes a low energy availability conversation.
Mm-hmm.
If someone talks to me about body composition, what I'll say is you need to eat in a way that lets you live your life, because food is not just fuel, even though that's how we talk about it around triathlon. Food is friendship. Food is family. Food is history. Food is culture. Food is so many more things than food. And we can't take that away from people.
Yeah.
But what I will say is generally when someone is talking to me about wanting to change body composition, my first questions to them are really about how they're handling their stresses, because body composition challenges, when someone is a little bit on the over fluffy side of things, that's very rarely about food by itself. Mm-hmm. They know how to eat. They know what to eat. They know that vegetables should make up most of their plate, that protein is important, that carbohydrates should be part of their meals. They know what all of this is. But it's generally either a portion awareness side of things, which that's easy. Just measure your food for a couple of weeks, see what you're doing. And again, I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not gonna be giving you diet plans or anything else. But measure your food, know what you're eating, and then how are you managing your stress? Oh well, it's an awful time at work. I have to have my latte. I have to have my this. And it's like, and then you just sort of pause and be quiet. And it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Then it is in my realm, which is, let's talk about some ways that you can actually manage your stress that isn't exercise, that isn't in a way that's harmful or destructive to the work that you put in, and let's talk that side of things. And then if someone's really committed to making a major change, I want them to see somebody who is a registered dietitian. I want somebody whose specialty it is having eyes on them. Like I'm a fabulous generalist about a lot of things, but specialists are necessary for the big questions, and we need them. And we should have a Rolodex with a few folks in it and be ready to make the call on our athletes' behalf to say, hey, you know what? I got an athlete who has had these failures and these complaints in the past. How would you address it? How would you handle it?
Yeah, sports physiology. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's that piece, and then the strength piece of things. how I prioritize strength, and in particular is number one, do you have any injuries? Because that's the first thing we got to deal with. And that again, we need to get you to the right people to see that. All right, great. No injuries, fabulous. What are your weak links? So doing an assessment where I have them either send me videos of movements or descriptions of the quality and quantity of things. All right, where are the weak links? We need to shore those up for sure in the off season. And then what's the quality of your movement? Do you have restrictions? Are you tight? I think that's probably one of the biggest descriptions. Oh, my shoulders are just tight. It's like, okay, well, is it a strength problem or is it a motion problem? And so looking at, different types of dynamic flexibility. Some people enjoy yoga. Some people enjoy just specific exercises, but things where you have to practice the quality of your movement. And then after those pieces, all right, what kind of force can you develop? Can you lift heavy things? And if it wasn't a podcast and it wasn't so polite, I would probably use a different word in there, but can you lift heavy stuff?
Right.
Because your ability to produce force determines how easy it is for you to bike, to run, to swim.
Yeah.
And then kind of once you're through those pieces, well, then it comes down to specialty movements and doing some things that might be specific adaptations for sport. Cable pulls where you're doing different components of the underwater swim stroke while in a side plank, perhaps. Things like that. But that's later in the chain, but that's how I sort of prioritize that food chain of strength, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And I can imagine that some things may be individualized, right? So you have on one end of the spectrum, you have the recreational athlete that's just doing it for fun and fitness versus, oh, yeah, I want to qualify for Boston Marathon or qualify for IRONMAN World Championship, where it's much more competitive and those athletes have much less degrees of freedom to hit those goals. And, so I think whatever the case, people mistakenly think that triathletes are skinny, sort of weak cardio, quote unquote, cardio junkies that are not strong. And I think, so that's another one. We have to try to moderate that. And people don't even realize that triathletes, especially long course triathletes, are some of the strongest athletes out there. But also, you're right. I think there's, too much focus on, oh, I gotta get smaller so I can get my watts per kilogram up.
I'll take 10 watts more every time. And I will argue everybody should be strong. It's really interesting. I've had a few health challenges over the last few years and lost a lot of just my natural strength over the course of time. And more that my emphasis is on making sure that I not only have my endurance fitness, but that I have strength, because I'm not going backwards in age, and I want to be independent, and I want to be able to say yes and go places 30 years from now, 40 years from now. Yeah. And that only comes from strength. So
a triathlete, say in a build phase, how many days do you get them into the gym without giving away too many of your secrets?
There are no secrets. It depends on the athlete. I have some athletes who love the gym, and I will actually build on their strength session every time they go to the pool. So they go to the pool, then they lift, then they're done. I have other athletes who do not care for the gym whatsoever. So for those athletes, I absolutely will respect that, except for the fact they need to have some strength for certain things. So then I'll build in 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the end of every session or at the beginning of a session, so that it's just part of their run or their bike or their swim.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
One of my athletes, my favorite thing to do for her is, it's a set where she does 500 and then does 10 press ups on the side of the pool, 400, 10 press ups, 300, 10 press ups, 200, 10 press ups. And there was an older gentleman. It was like, "Oh, honey, there's a ladder right over there if you want to get out." And it's like, she's like, no, I'm doing my strength work, and fitting it in a way that she enjoys, but it also gets done. And that's, I think, the sort of secret to it is, it's not about how many days you go to the gym. It's, do you do the strength that's in your schedule at all? And then do you do it with attentiveness, purpose, fullness, and do you do it well? And that's that figuring that out for the people, like getting the right person, the right sort of thing for them is that's the secret sauce.
Yeah. And I think people underestimate how much strength you actually get from swimming, cycling, and running. So they think you need to go do a CrossFit session.
Totally different set of adaptations right there than what we're looking for.
Exactly. Okay. So I think we've come to the end. And anything else that what should we be talking about that we're not talking about? Anything? What do you would want to end with?
What should we talk about that we haven't been talking about? Fun.
Having fun. Yeah.
Like there's if find your people and find the people that you laugh with and that it's fun to do these things with, and not the ones who make you feel smaller. Find the people that make you feel bigger and grander and part of things. And that's the community that makes this sport, to me, as special as it is.
Yeah. Because if it's not fun to you, you got to really think about whether or not you should be doing it. Right. So, yeah.
True story, right?
Yeah. All right. How can people find you out on social media?
Social media, on Instagram, we're at team_BPC. On Twitter, I am at SPSOTIR, and we're at breakthroughperformancecoaching.com.
Breakthrough Performance Coaching. A couple of my boys are over there. Jeff, Jonathan. Yep. I know those guys.
Yep.
Cool guys.
I am incredibly lucky to be part of a group of coaches. I like, just complete side note, I didn't recognize how special it was until I went to a coaching class this past January, where I was the only one who had this group of people that would ask questions of each other and challenge each other. And almost so many of us coach in a silo that like finding your people is huge. And I've got a really great crew. I'm incredibly lucky and grateful.
Yep. I'll put the link to Breakthrough Performance Coaching in the show notes. So go and check it out. Follow Susan on Twitter, social media. And we're going to wait for her book. Her book or documentary. Which one? It's got to come out soon.
Thank you so much. That is incredibly flattering and completely terrifying.
Do you ever think about it?
I think everybody who has ever gone to school has thought about it.
I mean, you got a thesis, right? So I heard that if you have a thesis, you basically have a book.
Oh, I have hundreds of pages, but I don't know how many people want to read about spit. I collected saliva as one of my variables in my very interdisciplinary dissertation. But it's a fun thing to think about, and hopefully maybe someday.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Seriously, this was fun.
Thanks again to Dr. Susan Sotir. Check her out. I put all the links to where you can get to her in the show notes and her social media links. What a great coach. Also a great person. I think if she ever writes a book, it will do well, and I'll be the first one in line for it. Hopefully, this podcast will be something that will get all of you athletes through the holiday season and prime yourself to start getting ready for 2023 and putting together some race goals and some training goals. Thanks again. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast.
Follow Event Horizon Endurance Sport on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter for training programs and services. To become a member of our Endurance Institute or for a complete archive of podcasts, log on to our website, eventhorizon.tv.